Back home this weekend in Indiana, I took the time to very carefully read through all 159 pages of the agreement made with Iran, as well as a lot of supporting material written by foreign policy experts who've had an opportunity to also look at this. I read it carefully because words mean a lot. And as concerned as I was when we started through this process, I became much more concerned after reading through the fine print that is now called the agreement with Iran. Yesterday we returned to Washington to start the session this week. I've had the opportunity as a member of the Intelligence Committee to look over the classified annexes of this. There's still one outstanding, which we will be looking at as soon as we receive it. And the more I read, the more concerned that I am that we have struck not a good deal, not a passable deal that we have to accept, but a bad deal that is clearly worse than no deal. 4 presidents, 3 previous presidents, and this current president have declared over the years of their service that a nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable. Each president used that very word, unacceptable. But this deal intends simply to slow down Iran's march to nuclear weapons credibility. But even the White House has conceded now that it will not permanently stop Iran's nuclear ambitions. This in and of itself should raise major questions and concerns about this agreement. But perhaps more concerning is what the negotiations conceded in order to reach an agreement with a regime that calls America its enemy, brazenly violates UN resolutions, sponsors terrorism, threatens Israel's existence, is led by individuals who proclaim death to America, is responsible for more than 1,000 American military deaths since September 11, 2001. This is the regime we're dealing with. And here, 6 of the major powers in the world, led by the United States, or at least we thought they would be led by the United States, having all the leverage of their status in world affairs, negotiating with a country that violates all that I have just listed, that cannot be trusted, that simply is in a weak position, given the sanctions, thankfully, that the Congress has imposed and other presidents have imposed, is put in a situation where it should have the weak hand. Turns out to have had the strong hand against the weakness and the lack of will and resolve of the 6 nations, France, United Kingdom, Germany, the United States, China, and Russia. That was on one side of the table, that group. And the leverage they would have against an Iran that has simply not gained the trust of anyone except its loyal followers. A nation that is staggering because of the sanctions that have been imposed ends up being the strong hand, working against a weak hand. The will and resolve to stand tough and to achieve an agreement that was in the benefit of not just the United States but the world for a more secure Middle East and prevention of nuclear weapon possession by Iran has been negotiated away. Clearly, in the coming weeks, we'll be down here talking about various aspects of this agreement. And the time is limited today, so I will just go into a couple of things. The period covered by the deal is way too short. The promise that Iran would not have the capability to develop nuclear weapons is simply now on a pathway to acquiring that. President Obama has admitted that in these future circumstances, Iran's breakout time to nuclear weapons will be essentially 0. That's what he said some time ago. Of course, now the President, Secretary of State, and the White House are making public statements saying, well, that's really not what we meant. And they've said a number of things that to reassure the American people that trust us, everything's going to be okay. What particularly grabbed my attention was the inspection regime. Clearly, on any kind of agreement of this type, there has to be as tight a regimen of inspections as possible. We know Iran has cheated in the past. We know they're going to try to cheat in the future. They're going to try to interpret every nuance, every word in this agreement as something different than what we will describe it, and therefore verification of their ability to live by the word of the agreement, as bad as it is, has to be verified completely. And when you look at the sections necessary to accomplish that, it raises real concerns. I will spend more time on this floor later, given the constraints here, to talk about this inspection regime. But let me address an issue that has just come to light. I was sitting through and plowing through this agreement, and when I came to section 78, it started listing the time frame for how we would proceed if we found out or had information to suspect that Iran was cheating on the agreement. And you've heard the 24 days as the maximum, which, by the way, is longer than just about any other agreement we have entered into, arms agreement. Many of these have been 9 hours. Everybody knows, and we've given up the anywhere, any place. We now have to have Iran's approval before we move forward without a convoluted Byzantine process in terms of getting to the point where a resolution is made. We now know, reading through section 78, I believe it is, to 82, that it doesn't add up to 24 days, it adds up to 54 days. We're talking nearly 2 months or more. I was interested to open up the Wall Street Journal this morning. Iran inspections in 24 days, not even close. And I was sitting there, it's been pounded into our head by the Secretary of State. 24 days, that's all it is, 24 days. We're on top of this, we can get it resolved. Don't worry, they can't move their stuff somewhere else or cover their tracks or remove evidence of what we suspect is a violation of the agreement. And over and over and over, the Secretary of State and the President of the United States said 24 days. First of all, 24 days is not a good deal, as I just mentioned. It ought to be 24 hours or less. Anytime, anywhere. What do we do to any time? We've stretched it out to 54 days. Despite what the administration has said about this, I cannot believe a clear reading. Read it, section 78 to 82, I believe it is. Add it up. It's 54 days of time, if all time is used, to come to an agreement. What can you do in 54 days when you've been accused of cheating? You remove the evidence, and that's exactly what they will do. This is a huge revelation here that is now in print. And why the administration keeps insisting that this is not the case, that don't worry, folks, we got it covered on inspections, that simply is false. Now, so let's find out that they are cheating. But when our negotiators abandoned their position on gradual sanctions relief, they opted instead for this so-called snapback provisions that would punish Iraq for noncompliance, for cheating. Read the agreement. The convoluted Byzantine scheme for such a return to sanctions would be exceedingly time-consuming and is not politically realistic. It's an illusion, and more on this later. Arms embargo lifted, on and on it goes. Mr. President, I've just outlined a couple of concerning, very deeply concerning issues here that need to be discussed. Unfortunately, we've been put in a box by this administration. They ran straight to the United Nations to get approval for this without America's elected representatives and the American people having an opportunity to present the deal to them and let them make the decision. And so 5 of the 6 nations involved here, even if the United States comes to the point where we defeat this effort, if we are possible to do so, 5 of the 6 now have the full green light to go forward. Germany rushed over with its contracts in hand with their commerce minister, and the heads of the major corporations are signing up deals like you wouldn't believe. And those aren't going to be snapped back. We now have an opportunity to review this pending deal. And I would urge every member of the United States Senate to take the time to sit down and read this thing through carefully. Look at what the experts, foreign policy experts have said about it. Look at where the flaws are. Let's sit down and discuss it. Let's look at those top secret classified annexes. Every member here has the opportunity to do that if they so choose. And bring forward to the American people that which we are allowed to bring forward, that's not classified. Bring forward the flaws of what has turned out to be an agreement that simply was not in the interests of the future of the American people. My time has expired. Let me just wrap up by saying the President has defended his deal by challenging critics to put forth an alternative. How about this? How about exercising American leadership and making it clear that crippling sanctions will be maintained and strengthened if Iran nuclear activity continues? Congress should reject this bad deal. We then can enact more vigorous sanctions to persuade the Iranian leaders to reconsider their positions, or to persuade the Iranian people to reconsider their leaders. Mr.